You may want that. Good morning. Am I live? You can hear me? Okay, so I got my mask on, and as we were getting ready yesterday, we said we got to make sure we put masks in the vehicle so we don't forget them, not knowing what the tradition would be, what the practice would be here when we got here. So I just got to ask you, when you're out and about, and if you come into a gathering like this and everybody's wearing their mask, do you kind of have the feeling like you're at a conference for cat burglars? It really feels kind of odd, doesn't it? And it's almost like we're not sure who we are and we're not sure who you are. And my wife made the comment when we were in Walmart the other day. She said, "I never see anybody I know, but how would I know them if I didn't recognize their hairstyle?" And that's probably pretty true. I was debating on what to share with you this morning, and I want to give you a little caveat before we begin. I have files full of sermons from over the years, and I was going through some, and I just didn't have any positive response to anything that I was looking at. And I finally sat, and as I was thinking about this opportunity, and I have other opportunities now that I'll be in other churches over the next weeks, and I finally said to myself, yes, I'm retired from active ministry, but I am still a leader in the church. As a leader, what is my responsibility to the people? Although I'm not a pastor of the church and I'm not your pastor, but as a leader in the kingdom, what's my responsibility to you? What would God want me to communicate to you during these very trying days? And I decided that I felt the Lord said, you need to speak right into what's going on in the world in which we are all living. And not dance around the issues, but let's talk about what does this mean for the followers of Jesus in days like this. So that's what we're going to do. Now, I also want to give a little disclaimer that I'm going to talk about the issues that we are facing culturally, socially, politically in our country. I am not going to take political sides. Okay? I'm not going to take political sides. So put your knives away. All right? I am going to take a biblical side. Okay? And I have been emailing pastors, and I'm very concerned. As a leader, I am concerned about the health of the church in these days. I'm concerned that the church does not have a voice. It has not found its voice in our culture, in our society. And I'm concerned that the church has not found its message. It seems early on when the government shut down the economy and they basically shut down the whole culture, that the only message that the church had is that we want to meet together. We want to meet together. We want to go to church. We want to go to worship. I understand that. This is our first time in worship personally, my wife and I, since March. Okay? So I understand, I get it that believers want to come together and worship. But here's what the world heard. Here's the message that the rest of America heard. The church is all about them. That's the message that was being proclaimed. It's all about us. We want to worship. We want to get together. There was no message there to a world that was in utter desperation from the kingdom. So with that as background, I've entitled the message, It's a Mad, Mad World, because I think it is a mad, mad world. You remember the movie years ago, It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, comedy? The world, it seems like, has really gone crazy. We got this challenge with China. We've got trade deals and trade tensions with China. We've got what many of our leaders believe is this problem with spying by the Chinese to not just the American culture, but to the United States government. We've read that they closed an embassy, a Chinese embassy in Houston, in Texas, expelled its representatives. Our country is severely divided. People on the left want to blame absolutely everything in the world on the president, and people on the right are demanding that the people on the left have gone absolutely nuts. We have riots in the streets, and the mark of the American culture right now is lawlessness. There's a reason for that. There is a reason for that. The nation appears to be engaged perhaps in a second civil war, and the shots have already been fired. On top of that, we have the COVID pandemic, and we have had to deal with fear-mongering that has been shouted and declared at us from every angle. Economically, the whole nation has been shut down. Unemployment went to rates perhaps beyond the Great Depression. Businesses are failing all around us, and you may be here and you may be in private business, personally owned business, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. My wife and I have developed a friendship relationship with a husband and wife team who own a restaurant franchise where we live. And it's a large franchise nationwide. They privately own one franchise. And with them, one day last week, they told us that after they were allowed to reopen, they have been running $15,000 a month in the red. How can you open a restaurant and lose $15,000 a month when you're open and stay in business? You can't. If you want to pray for your community, pray for these business owners who are trying to figure out how they're going to stay in business while they're not making any money. We're in a situation that this country has never, ever seen before. It goes beyond that. During this whole thing, those who have been driving what has been the civil unrest now feel free that they, for the first time in the open, can now take on the church, take on Christianity. And they have been burning churches, and they have been tearing down symbols of Christianity and defacing properties. You need to understand, as a follower of Jesus, you are not immune to what's going on civilly, socially, culturally around us. And it may be coming to street near you, and it may be coming to a church near you. There's a little ditty from country music that you'll remember. Those of us you're my age anyway. You'll remember this little ditty. It goes like this: gloom, despair, and agony on me. Deep, dark depression, excessive misery. If it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. Gloom, despair, and agony on me. That's where America is. Our communities are filled with despair. The people you meet on the streets are filled with despair. So the question that's been burning for me is, how are we supposed to respond to all this nuts, all this craziness, all this insanity? Let me take it a little further, all this danger. I want us to go to an Old Testament minor prophet, the book of Hosea. And if you have a Bible, I'd like you to turn to it, and the easiest way to find it is to find the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, and it's right after the book of Daniel. And I want us to go to chapter 12 and verse 6. And we're just going to look at one verse here this morning, verse 6. Now, a little setting here. The setting is that in Hosea's days, he was a prophet of what is called the northern kingdom, and it was known as Israel, and the southern kingdom was known as Judah. The northern kingdom had abandoned, to the most part, their loyalty to Jehovah, to the Lord himself. And the worship of other gods from other countries around them had seeped in and found their way into Israel, and many in Israel had begun to follow the practices of these other gods and to worship these other gods. And as a result, God himself said he was going to bring discipline upon the Jews of Israel because of their infidelity to him, and to bring them back to himself. So Hosea was sent to proclaim God's message to that northern kingdom, to the Jews of Israel in their infidelity. Now, this is just part of his message, but we're going to pick this up in verse 6. And here is part of what Hosea said to the people. Therefore, return to your God. Observe kindness and justice, and wait for your God continually. In their infidelity, Hosea says, return to your God, ta-da, 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 ta-da. He gives instructions to the people of Israel that I think are perfectly fitting for us to review and examine and explore in our situation today. He gives some very practical advice for facing a world that has gone crazy. The first word of advice that we can lift from Hosea's message is this: let's make sure our Christianity is real. Let's make sure it's real. Verse 6, he says, return to your God. And then he says, and wait for your God continually. How can we know? Well, just the other day, my wife was mowing the yard. Oh, that's a terrible thing for me to admit and confess in front of you. She was doing the mowing. She loves, and it's our little place up, so it's not very much. But she was doing the mowing, and the mower quit. And she couldn't get it restarted. So I went out, and in my head I said, well, there's 3 things to check on the motor. Does it have fuel? Is it getting air? And does it have spark? 3 simple checks to make sure a mower or a motor is running right. Does it have fuel? Does it have air? And does it have spark? Hosea gives us some checks for us to look at our Christianity and be able to determine whether it's real or not. Is it the real thing? Am I fooling myself? Or is what I'm clinging to a false hope? He gives us a couple of checks. First of all, he says to us, make sure your faith is based in a personal relationship with Jesus. He says, return to your God in the first part of the verse. The Jews of Israel had lost their faith. They had lost their faith, but they hadn't lost their religion. They still had the Jewish religion. They still had the temple. They still had sacrifices, and they were still making sacrifices. They still had priests. They still had the holy days. They were still celebrating all of the feasts and the holy days of Israel. They had all the rites and all the rituals of the faith, but they had no personal engagement or no relationship with the God of that religion. There was no loyalty, there was no trust, there was no life that was lived based on His principles. The New Testament says that they had a form of godliness but denied its power. They had religion without relationship. They had a false or a fake religion. It looked good on the outside because they had the temple and they had the priests and their robes and they had all the rites and all the rituals and they were doing all the religious things. They had been in and doing everything that the religion said that they needed to be doing, but it was empty. There was no reality. During these days, we got this thing with the pandemic, and I came up here with a mask just for a little levity today. But at some point, you know, when it all broke out, remember all the big to-do about hand sanitizers? How many of you had problems finding any? I mean, you couldn't buy them. We went from store to store. Fortunately, we had the stuff at home to make our own that got us through until the panic kind of and supply caught up again, and you could again find it in a store or a gas station or somewhere. There was this madness to get hand sanitizers, and in the midst of all that madness, what happened on the internet? The internet was inundated with fake hand sanitizers. Oh, you could buy it. You could order it on the internet. It was just junk. It didn't work. It was worthless. But it was called hand sanitizer. You know, as science eventually catches up with reality in this whole thing, they may eventually come and say, we have some ways of treating this, and we now have a vaccine that will help prevent it in people. I don't know if those days will ever happen, but they may. I want you to know this, that if I go to get a vaccination for COVID-19, I don't want the doctor to say to me, well, this is just as good as the real thing. I'm not buying that. You won't know the difference. You know, there are some times when only the real thing will be sufficient. The danger we face during these days is that we might confuse religion with relationship. And we might be fooled into thinking that religion is just as good as relationship. The Jews had relationship, or had religion. They had the temple, they had the worship, they had the sacrifices, but they had no relationship. We can have churches. We can attend worship. We can give mental assent to theologies and teachings of the church. We can attend Bible studies and even have membership in a local congregation. We can have religion but have no relationship with the living God. We can have form without reality. Jesus said, "He who believes in me will have eternal life." He who has relationship with me will have eternal life. So the first thing is, make sure our faith is based in a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And I want you to begin there this morning. I want to ask you the question. As you view your Christianity, is it built and based on ritual and rites that you have practiced? Or is it rooted and grounded in the choice, the decision to follow Jesus Christ, to put your trust in Jesus Christ and Him alone for your destiny? Make sure your faith is based in a personal relationship with Jesus. And the second check is, make sure your faith is lived in hopeful reliance on Jesus. He says, wait for your God continually. That means to anticipate with expectation, to rely on, to hope in. It means to live in a state of confident dependence on the Lord. So it begs the question, where does our hope lie during these days? Is our trust in the Lord first, foremost, and primary? Is our faith in Him and our trust in Him above and beyond all else and everything else? Where does our hope and our trust lie? In America today, there is an unholy trinity operating. That unholy trinity consists of government, politicians, and science. That's the unholy trinity. And they have a prophet. And their prophet is the media. Many, 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 many people have bowed their knees and their heads and have surrendered their lives, their trust, and their whole being to this unholy trinity. I'm meddling now. I can see it. They've put their hope and their trust in these gods, small g. And what has happened in the last 3 or 4 months is that it has been thrown right in our face. It has just been thrown right in our face that these gods are not gods at all. We ascribed to these people the attributes of God. They're all knowing. They're all powerful. If they're all knowing, why didn't they know this? If they're all powerful, why didn't they stop it? Why don't they cure it? Why don't they help us? We have been forced to admit that the place we have been putting our trust as Americans, as the hope of our God, these people are not gods at all. The gods of this world have failed the people of this world. Now, your neighbors who have been trusting in government and are trusting in politicians and are trusting in science to be their God are filled with despair because it's been lost. They don't know where to turn. Now they're angry, they're upset, they're angry at their former gods because they failed them. And they don't know where to turn. So now I'm going back to where I started this message. I'm saying, where is the voice of the church to our communities? And what is our message? I told one pastor, we have a message that we are proclaiming on Sunday morning in our worship services, and it is reverberating in the walls of the sanctuary. But if you're in the parking lot, you will never hear it. I'm asking questions that I don't have the answer for you. I'm just asking you as a congregation, where's your voice to this town? And what's your message to these people? Those are deep questions. They may be uncomfortable questions to answer. But the gods of this world have failed the people of this world, and they are lost, and they don't know what to do. And we have the answer. David in the Psalm says, why are you in despair, O my soul, and why have you become disturbed within me? Hope in God. In Proverbs, Solomon writes, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your paths straight. During these days, we are tempted to put our hope and our trust in many things. And the absolute worst thing we can do is to put our trust in the least trustworthy and the least reliable things in our world. It will leave us with despair. Can government and politicians and science help us during these days? Sure, there are many things that they can do to help us. They can help some. Can these false gods give us a perfect world? They want you to think they can. But the answer is no. They cannot give you a perfect world. We're all going to die of something. Did you know that? Every one of us in this room is going to die of something. The fear of the people in our community is that this COVID thing, they may die from it. I'm not living in fear of COVID. I refuse to live in fear. Because my hope isn't in science. My hope isn't in government. And my hope is not with politicians. My hope is in Jesus Christ and Christ alone. And if He chooses to take me to Himself through COVID, so be it. I will praise His name. I want to go to heaven, but I'm not homesick yet. You know what I mean? So I choose to live responsibly, and I choose to use a mask for the sake of others, and I choose to do the things that are socially responsible, but I do them not because the government or a governor or politicians tell me I have to. I do it because I'm an obedient follower of Jesus and I love my neighbor as myself. That's why I do it. I have a higher standard. I have a higher morality. I have a higher calling. So I choose to live responsibly. Well, if you're here this morning and you have been basing your Christianity on the rites and rituals of a church or a denomination, and you've given mental assent to Christianity, and by that you basically mean, well, I'm not a Buddhist, and I'm not Muslim, I guess I'm Christian. Then my pleading to you today is, would you step out of religion and step into a relationship with the God who loves you? Would you make the choice this morning to say yes to Christ? Say, yes, I'll follow you. I will put you above and beyond all other loyalties. I will trust you for my life, and I will trust you in my death, and I will trust you for my eternity. Would you do that today? There's a second word of advice that Hosea gives the folks there. He says, first of all, let's make sure our Christianity is real, and then second of all, let's make sure our humanity is Christ-like. He says in verse 6, observe kindness and justice. Other translations translate it, observe love and justice. In other words, our life is now lived under the authority and the influence of the Spirit of Christ. When we find ourselves in relationship with Him, that impacts how we live our life. Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. If you're in relationship with me, you will live in such a way as to be consistent with my teaching and my ways. Genuine faith finds its way into every nook and cranny of our lives. It seeps into us and then it begins to leak out. Genuine faith is lived and is practiced, and genuine faith makes a difference in who I am. Paul says in Galatians 2:20, he says, I have been crucified with Christ, and it's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things have passed away, new things have come, he said in 2 Corinthians. The challenge is for us to live out our humanity toward others as Jesus would have us live it. And we need to desperately be doing that during these days. So he gives us a couple of simple directives. Very quickly, we'll wrap this up. First of all, he says, treat others equitably. In other words, equally. Treat them all the same. That's kind of that idea of kindness. It's seeking the welfare of others. What is good, best, and beneficial for them. Personally treat all others equally and seek equal treatment for all others. John 4 tells us about an incident in Jesus' life. He was teaching in Judea, that's what we would call that southern kingdom. And Jerusalem was down there, and he was teaching in that area. And there was growing interest and growing conflict between the followers of Jesus and Jesus himself teaching and the Pharisees. And it was reaching a point that was becoming dangerous, and Jesus knew his time was not come yet for this conflict. And so Jesus feels he needs to leave that area. So to avoid the conflict, he abruptly leaves and heads north for Galilee. But in order to get to Galilee, he either had to take the long route and cross the Jordan River to the east side of the Jordan River, go up and then cross the river again and come back into Galilee, or he had to go through an area called Samaria. Now, historically, the people that live in Samaria were people that were despised by the Jewish people, because the Jewish people were the descendants of the folks that went into the diaspora, into captivity for 40 years in Babylon. And while they were there, they maintained the purity of the Jewish bloodline. And then they returned to Jerusalem and resettled their country again. People that were left in the area during the 40 years of captivity that the Babylonians did not take with them, but left them there, those people intermarried with the people that were known as Samaritans in that area. That's what the area was called. They intermarried with them, and they lost the purity of the Jewish blood. And when the pure Jews came back, they despised those people for what they did. And they never got over it. And so a good Jew would never walk through Samaria. They would take the long walk and go across the river and up and cross the river and go around. Jesus, in his haste to leave the area, went through Samaria. And he came to the city of Sychar, and while he is there, he stops at a well. And a woman from Sychar came to the well as women would do every day in their tradition to get water. Water to wash with for the day, water to drink for the day, water to cook with for the day. She came to the well, and Jesus strikes up a conversation with her, beginning by asking her if she might give him a drink of water. Now, that was an odd occurrence both for a Jew to do with a Samaritan, and it was an odd occurrence for this Samaritan woman to have happened to her with him. They enter into conversation, and Jesus talks to her about her life and her needs in life. And he informs her about who he is and why he is there and what he has to offer her in her life. The disciples come back and they're aghast that he is there talking with this Samaritan woman, because they said that should never happen and he had no business talking with her. And the reason was because this woman had 3 strikes against her. 1, she was a Samaritan and they despised Samaritans. 2, she was a woman in a man's world. She didn't have any place. That doesn't play well in America today. I'm sorry I have to even raise that. But that was the reality then and there. So the second strike against her was she was a woman, and the third strike against her was that she was a woman of poor reputation. She had a reputation for loose morality. With 3 strikes against her, Jesus sat down and engaged her and talked with her and treated her just like anyone else. Treats her with respect and with dignity and with love as an equal. In his humanity, Jesus loved his neighbor as himself. Today, this unholy trinity that we're having to deal with of government, politicians, and science, and their prophet, the media, are all portraying a message of division, of distrust, and discord. And they're setting one against the other, brother against sister, father against son, race against race, state against state, local and state government against the federal government, communities that choose to be more open economically versus communities that decide to be more closed economically. Division, discord, and distrust. Sounds a lot like the disciples when they saw Jesus talking to the Samaritan woman at the well. In the midst of all this, what is our attitude and what is our message? Genuine faith demands that we declare and demand that all men are treated with justice and with equity. And the followers of Jesus need to seek to do so. There is no room for racism in this room. There is no room for favoritism of one people group over another people group, over one race over another, over one gender over another, or of age, or any other mark of distinction. Listen, God loves the world. He loves every man, every woman, every boy, every girl, every adult, every child, regardless of how they look, what they look like, regardless of whether they're your kind of people or not. He loves them. And if we are to walk the walk that Jesus wants us to walk, because we are in relationship with Him, we must do nothing less. Treat others equally. And then secondly, treat others fairly. He uses the word justice. The word justice means to respect the rights of others. What rights? On the news this last week, in the chaos in the cities of Chicago and Portland right now in particular, I saw news coverage where one of the leaders of the looting and the burning and everything else, I heard them make two public statements in the media. One was, when they broke into one of the main, was it Nordstrom's or I forget what it was, they smashed the windows and went in and just looted the whole store. One of the leaders said, "We have the right to what was in there." Then I most recently heard one of the agitators say, "We have the right to demand that you white people give us your houses." Did you hear that? Who says they have that right? Do they have that right just because they say they have that right? Who says they have those rights? And how is that right determined? Justice is rooted. Justice is based on objective truth. Justice requires a solid and firm foundation that doesn't change. It is that foundation which is the arbiter, which is the guide, which is the measuring tool for what justice is, how it is defined, how it is implemented. Without that foundational tool, that objective truth, there can be no justice. It is not possible to have justice without objective truth. And so, most of us in this room share the same experience that I had growing up and going through the schools. And if you went beyond high school, in particular on into college, we were taught a new philosophy of life in the world. And that philosophy that we were taught is called relativism. Truth is relative. What is true depends on the circumstance. What is true depends on who the people involved are. What is true depends on the environment in which the situation is being dealt with. Truth is relative. There was the abandonment of objective truth. Objective truth is truth that is always true. It is never untrue. Truth is not dependent on the way you think about it. Truth doesn't care what you think. You may not like this truth. You may say, I don't like that truth. I think that is just crazy. That doesn't affect truth. Truth is true. Objective truth is true. It's true whether you believe it or not, whether you like it or not. It's true whether it's easy in this circumstance or hard in this circumstance. It's always true. That objective truth would be true if mankind never existed. If there was never a person to know about that truth, to think anything about that truth. If none of us ever existed, that truth would still be true. 30 years ago, our academia abandoned absolute truth, and our culture abandoned absolute truth. And they began to teach this philosophy of life of relativism. My wife and I just recently took a trip to visit Noah's Ark. Anybody been there? Oh, it's a great experience. You really should go. The advertisement on TV where the giraffe falls over when he sees how big it is, that's true. Okay? I just want you to know. I'm just saying. It's true. Yeah, it's relative. Great line. Anyway, while we were there, as we were going through, they got these posts all over, or posters, and they have information on them. And you're walking around and you do a lot of reading while you're there. One of them that I found was an explanation on how they built the ark. And part of what they had to do when they built the ark is that the biblical directions for building the ark was to build it in so many cubits. Remember that? So, any thinking guy would immediate reaction is, well, what in the world is a cubit? And I would guess none of us in this room, I may be wrong on that. I should back off. I'd say maybe most of us in this room really don't know what a cubit is. Okay? Well, the people that built that ark didn't really know either. Now, we know that it's supposed to be from the elbow to the tip of the fingers. Okay? But my cubit is different than yours. Okay? There isn't one in here that's probably, we're all different. Our cubits are all different. So one of the things they had to do in the building of the ark is they had to establish a unit of measurement for the cubit. And they determined that a cubit was 20.4 inches. The entire ark is built on the measurement of the cubit being 20.4 inches. Everything that went in that ark, every timber that was cut, every notch that was cut, everything that was measured against the standard of a cubit being 20.4 inches. There must be a standard for determining truth and justice. Otherwise, justice becomes arbitrary. It becomes a matter of personal opinion. Or, let's put this on the screen here. Let me say it this way. Justice becomes this. Justice is just what I say it is. Now, have you been hearing that the last 4 months? Justice is just what I say it is. You have to give me what I want because I say I have the right to it. This is nuts, folks. This is crazy beyond belief. This is biblical. Listen, Judges 21:25. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Let me rephrase this. In those days, there was no authority in Israel. The king was the authority. The king is the one who determined what was right and what was wrong. That's what he said. He made up the rules. He wrote them. He determined what justice was. Nobody else could do it. The king did it. If you want to know what you can do and what you can't do, you ask the king. If you know what's right and what's wrong, the king will tell you, because he is the authority. There was no authority in Israel, and as a result, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. If that isn't modern America, I don't know what is. This is the world that you and I, we're going to go out these doors, and that's the world we're going to walk into. Paul says in Ephesians 6, verses 10 through 17, he talks about the armor of God and putting on the armor of God, the whole armor of God, including the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. And he says, now that you've put on all the armor, and the armor is both offensive and defensive. It's not just defensive that, oh man, I got great protection. The world can't hurt me. But it's offensive. I can go into the world and I can make a difference. Paul says, having put on the full armor of God, stand. Stand firm. Stand firm. Genuine faith demands that we treat others with justice, and we seek to have justice given to others. And we do it in faith by standing on the principles, the teachings of Jesus, the principles of God's Word. Paul gives us this crucial advice for desperate times. Put on the armor, the full battle complement of the soldier, offense and defense. Now stand. So when you go out here this morning, as you leave, I want you to stand in the certainty of your faith and your relationship to Jesus Christ. I want you to stand in the consistency of your life, the living of your life in and for Jesus Christ. In your faith and in your life, take your stand. Hold your ground. I want you to know this will not be easy. I want you to know more than that. This may be costly. Our culture has already sent the message. They are ready to come after us. Will you take a stand? Jesus said in Matthew 14:16, and with this I'm done. Jesus said to us, "You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." I'm done. I'm done meddling. I'm done making you mad. I may be done in a lot of ways. I just believe that if ever in the history of America, America needs the church. America needs you and me. We need to take a stand. We need to have a voice. We need to have a clear message of hope to give the world. And we need to be prepared to suffer for it. But we need to take a stand. We're going to sing one more time. So if the team will come, let's sing that closing song.